Hello, this is Morale Bernard with the continuing story of Booker T. Washington, the real life story of Booker T. Washington, an American. Last words were, this does not mean that there is as yet an equitable division of the school funds raised by common taxation. And by the way, please subscribe and please share. Greatly appreciated. Continuing story of Booker T. Washington. Now, while the education which we proposed to give at the Tuskgee Institute was not spontaneously welcomed by the white South, it was this training of the hands that furnished the first basis for anything like united and sympathetic interest and action between the two races at the South and the whites at the North and those at the South. Aside from its direct benefits of the Negro race, industrial education, in providing a common ground for understanding and cooperation between the North and South, has meant more to the South and to the cause of education than has been realized. Many white people of the South saw in the movement to teach young Negroes the necessity and honor of work with the hands, a means of leading them gradually and sensibly into their new life of freedom, without too sudden a transition from one extreme to the other. They perceived, too, that the Negroes who were master carpenters and contractors under the guidance of their owners could greatly further the development of the South if their children were not too suddenly removed from the atmosphere and occupations of their fathers, but taught to use the thing in hand as a foundation for still higher growth. Some were far-sighted enough to see that industrial education would enable one generation to secure economic independence, and in the next on this foundation to obtain a more abstract education if desired. The individual and community interest of the white people was directly appealed to by industrial education. They perceived that intelligence, coupled with skill, would add wealth, in which both races would increasingly share to the community and to the state. While crude labor could be managed and made to some degree profitable under the methods of slavery, it could not be so utilized in a state of freedom. Almost every white man in the South was directly interested in agricultural, mechanical, or other manual labor, in the cooking and serving of food, laundering and dairying, poultry raising, and everything related to housekeeping in general. There was no family whose interest in intelligent and skillful nursing was not now and then quickened by the presence of a trained nurse. Therefore, there came to be growing appreciation of the fact that industrial education of the black people had a practical and vital bearing on the life of every white family in the South. There was little opportunity for such appreciation of the results of mere literary education. If a black man became a lawyer, a doctor, a minister, or an ordinary teacher, his professional duties would not ordinarily bring him in touch with the white portion of the community, but rather confine him to his own race. While professional education was not opposed by the white South as a whole, it aroused little or no interest beyond a confused hope that it would produce a better and higher type of Negro manhood. Industrial education, however, soon recommended itself to the white South when they saw the Negro not only studying chemistry, but its applications to agriculture, cooking, and dairying, not merely geometry and physics, but their application to blacksmithing, brick making, farming, and what not. A common bond at once appeared between the two races and between the North and the South. A class of people in the South also favoured industrial education because they saw that as long as the Negro kept abreast in intelligence and skill with the same class of workmen elsewhere, the South, at present free from the grip of the trade union, would continue free from its restrictive influences. I should like to make a diversion here to call attention to the fact that official records show that within 1 year, about 1 million foreigners came into the United States, yet practically none of the immigration went into the southern states. The records show that in 1892, only 2,278 all told went into the states of Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. One ship sometimes brings as many as these to New York in one trip. Foreigners avoid the South. It must be frankly recognized by the people of that section that for a long period they must depend upon the black man to do it, what the foreigner is doing for the Great West, and that they cannot hope to keep pace with the progress of people in other sections if 1/3 of the population is ignorant and without skill. If the South does not help the Negro up, it will be tying itself to a body of death. If by reason of his skill and knowledge one man in Iowa can produce as much corn in a season as 4 men can produce in Alabama, it requires little reasoning to see that Alabama will buy most of her corn from Iowa. An instance which illustrates most interestingly the value of education that concerns itself with the common things about us is furnished by Professor Giacava, the director of our agricultural department. For some time it has been his custom to prepare articles containing information concerning the condition of local crops and warning the farmers against the ravages of certain diseases and insects. Some months ago, a white landholder in Montgomery County asked Mr. Carver to inspect his farm. While doing so, Mr. Carver discovered traces of what he thought was a valuable mineral deposit used in making a certain kind of paint. The interest of the agriculture expert and the landholder at once became mutual. Mr. Carver analyzed specimens of the deposits in the laboratory at Tuskegee and sent the owner a report of the analysis with a statement of the commercial application and value of the mineral. It is an interesting fact that 2 previous analyses had been made by chemists who had tabulated the constituents with greatest accuracy, but failed to grasp any idea of value in the deposits. I need not go into the details of this story, except to say that a stock company composes some of the best white people in Alabama has been organized and is now preparing to build a factory for the purpose of putting the product on the market. I hardly need add that Mr. Carver has been freely consulted at every step, and that his services have been generously recognized in the organization of the concern. Now and then, my advocacy of industrial education has been interpreted to mean that I am opposed to what is called higher or more intellectual training. This distorts my real meaning. All such training has its place and value in the development of a race. Mere training of the hand without mental and moral education would mean little for the welfare of any race. All are vital factors in a harmonious plan, but while I do not propose that every individual should have hand training, I do say that in all my contact with men, I've never met one who had learned a trade in youth and regretted it in manhood, nor have I ever seen a father or mother who was sorry that his children had been taught trades. There is still doubt in many quarters as to the ability of the Negro, unguided and unsupported, to hew out his own path and put into visible, tangible, indisputable forms the products and signs of civilization. This doubt cannot be extinguished by mere abstract arguments, no matter how ingeniously and convincingly advanced. Quietly, patiently, doggedly, through summer and winter, sunshine and shadow, by self-sacrifice, by foresight, by honesty and industry, we must reinforce arguments with results. One farm bought, one house built, one home neatly kept, one man the largest taxpayer and depositor in the local bank, one school or church maintained, one factory running successfully, one truck garden profitably cultivated, one patent cured by a Negro doctor, one sermon well preached, one office well filled, one life cleanly lived. These will tell more in our favor than all the abstract eloquence that can be summoned to plead our cause. Our pathway must be up through the soil, up through swamps, up through forests, up through the streams and rocks, up through commerce, education, and religion. In my opinion, we cannot begin at the top to build a race any more than we can begin at the top to build a house. If we try to do this, we shall reap in the end the fruits of our folly. When the first few students began to come to Tuskegee, I faced these questions which were inspired by my personal knowledge of their lives and surroundings. What can these young men and women find to do when they return to their homes? What are the industries in which they and their parents have been supporting them? The answers were not always to my liking, but this was not the point at issue. I had to meet a condition, not a theory. What I might have wanted them to be doing was one thing. What they were actually doing was the bedrock upon which I hoped to lay the foundation of the work at Tuskegee. It was known that a large majority of the students came from agriculture districts and from homes in which agriculture in some form was the mainstay of the family. I had learned that nearly 80% of the population of what are commonly called the Gulf states are dependent upon agricultural resources, directly or indirectly. These facts made me resolve to attempt in downright earnest to see what the Tuskegee Institute could do for the people of my race, by teaching the intelligent use of hands and brains on the farm, not by theorizing, but by practical effort. The methods in vogue for getting enough out of the soil to keep body and soul together were crude in the extreme. The people themselves refer to this heart-breaking effort as making a living. I wanted to teach them how to make more than a living. I have little respect for the farmer who is satisfied with merely making a living. It is hardly possible that agricultural life will become attractive and satisfactory to ambitious young men or women in the South until farming can be made as lucrative there as in other parts of the country, where the farmer can be reasonably sure of being able to place something in the bank at the end of the year. For the young farmer to be contented, he must be able to look forward to owning the land that he cultivates, and from which he may later derive not only all the necessities of life, but some of the comforts and conveniences. The farmer must be helped to get to the point where he can have a comfortable dwelling house, and in its bath tubs, carpets, rugs, pictures, books, magazines, a daily paper, and a telephone. He must be helped to cherish the possibility that he and his family will have time for study and investigation, and a little time each year for travel and recreation, and for attending lectures and concerts. But the average farmer, whom I wanted to help through the medium of the Tuskgee Institute, was far from this condition. I found that most of the farmers in the Gulf states cultivated cotton. Little or nothing in the form of stock or fowls, fruits, vegetables, or grain was raised for food. In order to get the food on which man and livestock were to live while the cotton crop was being grown, a mortgage or lien had to be given upon the crop, or rather upon the expected crop, for the legal papers were usually signed months in advance of the planting of the crop. Cotton in the South has been known for years as the money crop. This means that it is the one product from which cash may be expected without question as soon as the crop is harvested. The result of this system has been to discourage raising anything except cotton, for the man who holds the mortgage upon the crop discourages, and in some cases prevents, the farmer from giving much of his time and strength to the growing of anything except cotton, since the money lender is not sure that he can get his money back from any other crop. The result of this has been that beginning in January, the farmer had to go to the store or to the moneylender for practically all of his food during the year. The rate of interest which the farmer had to pay on his advances was in many cases enormous. The farmer usually got his advances or provisions from a storekeeper. The storekeeper in turn borrowed money from the local bank. The bank, as a general thing, borrowed from New York. By the time the money reached the farmer, he had to pay in not a few cases a rate of interest which ranged from 15 to 30%. If he failed to make his payment at the end of the year, he was likely to be cleaned up. That is, everything in sight in the way of crops or livestock was taken from him. After being cleaned up, he would either try to make another crop on the same rented farm, trusting to Providence or the weather for better luck, or else move to another farm and go in search of someone else to run him, as the local expression describes the process. Not a few of the farmers whom I met had been cleaned up half a dozen times or more. In addition to having to pay the high rate of interest for food supplies and clothing in advance, the ground rent was also to be paid. By far the greater part of the land was rented. This, of course, had a hurtful effect, because the man who tilled the land did not own it. His main object was to get all he could out of the property and return it as little as possible. The results were shown in the wretched cabins and surroundings. If a fence was out of repair or the roof of the house leaked, the tenant had no personal interest in keeping up the premises because he was always expecting to move, and he did not want to spend money upon the property of other people. Instead of returning the cotton seed to the ground to help enrich the soil, he sold this valuable fertilizer. The land, of course, was more impoverished each year. Ditching and terracing received little attention. The mules with which the crops were made were rented or were being bought on time, as a rule, and the farmer did not have enough direct interest in them to encourage him to spend money in keeping them in prime condition. Besides, the food fed to the animals was not raised on the place, but had to be bought. Another serious result of the one crop system was that the farmers handled almost no cash except in the fall. To the ignorant and inexperienced men of my race, this was hurtful. If by any chance they were able to pay their ground rent and the principal and exorbitant interest charged for their advances and have a few dollars in cash left, the money did not remain with them long, for it came into their hands about Christmas time, when the temptation to spend it for whiskey, cheap jewellery, cheap buggies, and such unprofitable articles was too strong to be resisted. Had the same value been in the hands of the farmer in the form of corn, vegetables, fruit, stocks, or fowls, it would have been not only less likely to be wasted, but it would also have been available for the farmer and his family during the whole of the greater part of the year. Oh, why not join me for this real life story? That story of Booker T. Washington. Join me for the next video of Booker T. Washington. With me, Morel Bernard, the real life story of Booker T. Washington. Okay, see you then.